So I'm assuming that people want to go on cruises before we have a vaccine. So let's think about that. Prior to your cruise, you're told you have to self-quarantine for 14 days to ensure that when you get to that cruise ship, that everybody is free of the coronavirus, right? And to then get on the ship, you will either have that is, if you don't already have like the antibodies or immunity to COVID-19, right? So there may be some contact tracing system that we come up with where, like the Chinese, they have QR codes. So if you have been ill and you now have the antibodies to SARS-CoV-2, then you'll have a QR code on your phone that says that, so that the authorities don't have to do things like give you extra temperature checks or swab checks and tests and things like that. But whatever. So you either self-quarantine for 14 days or you've already had it. If you self-quarantine for 14 days, you go there, you're still subject to things like temperature check and a test before you get on the boat. Because remember, you have up to 4,000 people on these boats. So just one person who may be asymptomatic who gets on this boat on even a 5-day cruise, a quick 5-day cruise, even that person is going to come in contact with literally hundreds of other people, and they may all be symptomatic, but then they're going to disembark that ship when they get home and go back to their, wherever they came from, right? Everyone gets on at one port of call, but people tend to fly in from all over the place. So that's the other thing. So number one, people traveling to the port to get there, then passing the checks to get on the ship, right? So if you don't pass the temperature check or if you don't pass the quick test, then you aren't able to board the ship. And probably the people that are in your party aren't either, because they're assuming they probably traveled with you and they've been around you for like the last 24 hours, right? So they don't want to risk letting those people on either, even if they do pass the checks, right? So you got that problem to contend with. Now you get on the ship. So let's assume that you're on the ship. Everybody is COVID free. All right, and that's a big assumption, but let's run with it, all right, for ease of this thought experiment. Now, what do? You got 4,000 people on a ship. All right, where are you going? What are you doing? All right. Now, conceivably, those 4,000 people, they can all commingle since they're COVID free. But what are you doing? You just going out to sea, doing a big donut, and going home, right? Well, I mean, all the cruises I've been on, you go to ports of call. Now, you have two perspectives on this, right? One, you have the port of call, the receivers, right? So you're talking about like taking a Caribbean cruise, right? So going to like, say, Jamaica. Would Jamaica be happy to have that ship? Absolutely. Absolutely. Jamaica's economy is heavily dependent upon tourism, especially as you geographically get close to these ports, right? People coming off the boat, engaging in business with the street vendors and all of the wonderful restaurants and, just typical, touristy things that you do when you're in a port of call for a day, right? So Jamaica would love to have these people onto their island. And I think that most of the cruisers would love to go onto the island as well. But then you have the cruise line, and they have some liability for the safety and health of their passengers. Do they want to let 4,000 people disembark on an island that they have had no ability to get any assurance about the health of these individuals, right? They can't test the whole island of Jamaica before they let a boat off, right? I mean, that's ridiculous. So you see where I'm going with this? Like letting people off at a port of call before there's a vaccine, even if the curve is flattened and there aren't many cases, it just takes one person, right? One person getting ill. And that's the other part of this, is that even if you do have a highly efficient test system before you get back onto that cruise ship, if you're getting infected, if you converse with a street vendor and, you end up, catching SARS-CoV-2 from them, you will most certainly be asymptomatic for the next 3-4 hours before you then get onto the boat. So you're going to be able to pass a temperature check. But let's even talk about the logistics of that, like these temperature checks and even doing a swab check, like these all take time. It already takes time just to swipe your card to get back on the boat. If you've ever been on a cruise, sometimes those lines can be 30 minutes long, right? Well, now you're adding a temperature check and all these other things. I mean, you're talking about all kinds of operational nightmares. Okay. And then, of course, you're now dealing with the risk of having someone on the boat that could transmit this virus around to people, and then they disembark back at the original port of call and they go home across the country. And now you've got an entire new batch of, virus-laden people going back to the U.S. So what am I getting at here? Even if in this situation where all of these things work out perfectly and you figure out how to appropriately quarantine people, get them onto the cruise ship, and, you're probably not going to a port of call. I do know that companies like Disney and I believe some of the others may even own their own island. So maybe there's an answer there with, screening all of the people that work on that island ahead of time. Even that sounds like a bit much to me. But where there's a motivation with dollars and survival, then there can be a way too. But not all cruise lines have access to that, and it's just a very, very, very interesting and difficult problem to think through, even in a simple thought experiment for a cruise line, right? When we talk about reopening the economy. So it's very likely that if you solve all these problems, you're probably just going on a cruise to sea for like 3 to 4 days, turning around and coming back. And then the question is, well, how many people are going to be clamoring to go on one of those? I mean, certainly there will be people. No question about that. There will be people. I mean, 100% there will be people. The question is it going to be enough demand, and what's that demand look like? And it's obviously going to be a reduced demand, especially when you consider that very few people are going to be willing to get onto an airplane to travel to get to a port of call, right? So it may be more of like a local thing, like, being here in Texas, obviously, there's no reason to go to Miami to get on a cruise when you could go to Galveston instead and leave on a cruise out of the port of Houston there. So that's just like one of the many, many, many thought experiments that we could run through as to say, what does it really look like when we talk about reopening the economy and getting a more nuanced reference narrative around what we're already thinking in our head. Because when we hear the term reopening the economy, I think many of us are thinking like things just go back to the way that they used to be, and that's the extent of the thought that we're giving to it.